Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Donnells. Recently, on the Spookaroos Facebook group page, I asked the listeners, some of you guys, what your favorite episode was. And a lot of people came back and said that the Punky Brewster, the Nightmare World of Punky Brewster episode 75, I believe, from August of 2017, was their favorite. So, I started thinking, well, of course, it is Halloween time, so maybe we should cover some Halloween sitcoms, or Halloween-themed sitcom episodes. And, of course, there's Roseanne and Home Improvement. They did a lot of Halloween episodes. I've already talked about Kate and Allie, of course, and Punky Brewster. And I was trying to think of something that could be along those same veins. And one show that I thought of was The Cosby Show. Of course, unless you've been living in a cave or something these past few months or years even, you know that there is a big, big problem with talking about Bill Cosby and The Cosby Show. But tonight, we're going to talk about all of it. We're going to talk about the Halloween episodes themselves, and don't worry, we're going to get to everything else that we need to get to on tonight's Spooky Ass Shit. Let's be honest. I've said it before, but this was a really dumb name for a show. I didn't know that going in. I thought it was a really cool name. I still like it in theory, but practicalities being what they are, not being able to list the show by its actual title on iTunes or other media and in public. Also, when you're trying to get guests and you say that the name of the show is Spooky Ass Shit, that does dissuade a certain segment of the population from coming on. For example, if I want to try to talk to a doctor or college professor or something like that, someone with a little bit of credibility, maybe I want to do an episode about human behavior and I want to talk to a therapist. Well, they don't necessarily want their name to be on a show called Spooky Ass Shit. So that's why I've been saying, I've kind of broken down and saying Spooky AS more often. Who knows? Maybe one of these days I'll even go so far as to change the name of the show, but I don't know. We'll see. If I have to do that, I'll probably just cancel this show and move on to a different show. But enough of my rambling. Before we dive into the topic tonight, of course, I want to remind you to check out spookyas.com, or, if you're bold enough, spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the exact same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, even the ones no longer available on iTunes. You can also sometimes find outtakes and pictures to go along with the episodes, and sometimes YouTube videos. You can find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Twitter and Instagram. And this month on Instagram, this October, every single day I am posting a different picture from Halloween's past of me in Halloween costumes. And if you keep your eyes open, maybe we can even spot some recurring guest co-hosts in some of those pictures. Also, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas, and you can ask to join the Spookaroos group. We are a closed group for your privacy, but we are open to just about everybody. If your profile looks shady for some reason, like you don't look like a real person or something like that, I might not accept your request, but otherwise, we'd be happy to have you. So you search Spookaroos on Facebook. Don't click on the children's clothing company. Click on the one that looks spooky, and that should be us. All right, now, let's get into it. Before we begin, a little bit of background for those of you who maybe are particularly young, meaning born after 1990, I guess, or perhaps those of you who are not American, and maybe The Cosby Show was not such a big deal where you are from, or Bill Cosby was not such a big deal where you are from. But I've been trying to think of how to present this, because to do a really in-depth episode, it wouldn't be one episode, it would be a series of episodes, and I just can't cover every single aspect to Bill Cosby, The Cosby Show, and of course the nightmare that has become of it. But I decided what I'm going to do is tell it to you from my personal experience and perspective. Of course, I am a white male. So take that for what it is. But this is, I guess I'll start. When I was a kid, The Cosby Show, the sitcom, starring Bill Cosby, was a very, very big deal. It was the number one show in America, and it was a really great family sitcom that the whole family could sit down and watch together. Everybody would have something to laugh at. You could relate to the kids. They were funny. There was no violence or anything like that, no sexual stuff or anything like that. You could sit and watch it as a family, and everybody would laugh because the show itself in general was funny, and Bill Cosby himself is very funny. Speaking of Bill Cosby himself, that was the name of his stand-up special that he released previous to The Cosby Show coming out, which led to The Cosby Show. And we also had that on VHS, and I used to watch that as a kid over and over and over again. The Cosby Show was such a big deal that my neighbor and I used to pretend we were at the movies. We'd turn off all the lights and sit down with popcorn and sit and watch The Cosby Show. And at the time, of course, there had been black sitcoms before, predominantly black cast sitcoms before. Jefferson's, Good Times, etc. But The Cosby Show gets a lot of credit for being a show that showed the family they weren't poor, they weren't struggling. Bill Cosby played Heathcliff Huxtable, who was a doctor, and his wife was a lawyer, played by Phylicia Rashad, who was wonderful on the series. Everybody on the series in the early episodes, the early seasons, was wonderful. And it wasn't a show that drew racial lines. Of course, the cast was predominantly black, but they didn't make an issue of it. And there were rainbow cast members. There, Rudy always had friends of different stripes, and so did Theo. Adam Sandler appears on an episode as one of Theo's friends, as a matter of fact. And it didn't feel, as you were watching the show, it didn't feel like, oh, this is for black people. It was for everybody. The Cosby Show was for everybody. And for me, growing up in a small town, predominantly a white town, we did have one African-American child in my grade, in my year. When we got into high school, it was a little bit more diverse by then, but certainly growing up, there was one kid named Jason, and he was the representative for black people in our community. And the thing about The Cosby Show was, and luckily I grew up in a home where race was also not an issue. It didn't come up. We weren't, exposed to any kind of racism or anything like that. So to me, I didn't even watch it and think like this is a black family or anything like that. I just watched it, and these were just people. And looking back on it now as an adult and knowing the history that came before that show and all that stuff, I think that was actually a great service to the country because, as long as there was no other kind of negative influence on around them, people growing up watching The Cosby Show, white people who didn't have exposure to people of other races because of their, the small town or whatever that they came from, watched The Cosby Show as children and became comfortable and just accepting that, yeah, some people are a different color, but they can still be, they're just regular people. That's all. And like I'm saying, that wasn't even really a thought in my head as a child, but that's what's so great about the show. It helped me not have to have those thoughts of it was just, of course, these are regular people. This is, this is fine. This is what life is. People are different colors. And it seems so obvious now to say that, right? But there was definitely times in American history, as we all well know, where that would not have been the case. And we could go on and on if we really wanted to look into the history of Bill Cosby, for all the doors that he opened for African American actors and comics, and just the power that he was able to gain in Hollywood, the respect and the love from the nation. But I'll leave that to other shows and podcasts. Of course, you can see those other places. Again, I'm just going to talk from my personal experience. The Cosby Show was so popular that they released other Cosby ventures back on television. They reran things that had, gone by the wayside in the 70s. So not only did I grow up watching The Cosby Show, I also grew up watching Picture Page, which was a kid's show that he hosted, and Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, which was a cartoon that he hosted and voiced most if not all the characters on. So Bill Cosby was all over the place in my childhood. Loved Bill Cosby, grew up as a huge Bill Cosby fan, wrote him a fan letter, got his autograph, and then even, maybe about 10 years ago, went to see him in concert. And I was so excited. I went with a coworker. She was also very excited. And we were talking about it for days. We were excited about it. We went to the show. We had a great time. He was in his 70s, but still very funny and had a great time. Loved Bill Cosby. Absolutely love and adore Bill Cosby. So, with that framework in mind, let us begin by talking about The Cosby Show's Halloween episode. To the best of my recollection, they only really dealt with Halloween twice. But I must admit, I was really a fan of the early seasons, maybe the first 4 or so seasons. There were 8 seasons overall. I probably have seen all the episodes of The Cosby Show because, of course, I watched most of them in the first run, I think. And then they used to show it after school when I was in middle school and high school. And sometimes I'd put it on in the background then. So I'm sure that I've seen later episodes, but I don't remember them. They don't stick out in my head as well. And so I don't remember them touching on Halloween after these 2 episodes that we're about to talk about. But let's go through their Halloween episodes. And I know that a lot of you are worried about talking about Bill Cosby. The good news is the first Halloween show from season 2, episode 6, entitled appropriately enough, Halloween, actually doesn't feature Bill Cosby that much, so he's not going to come up too much in our discussion of this episode. So I'm going to go through these kind of quick because, of course, like I said, we have a big issue to talk about at the end of the episode. Season 2, episode 6, Halloween of The Cosby Show. Now, first of all, I was watching this on Amazon Prime. All the seasons of The Cosby Show are available there. However, of course, the show being filmed in the 80s was filmed in standard settings, right? Not widescreen or anything like that, right? Filmed for regular old square televisions. Now, of course, we have widescreen. We have the rectangular TVs. So now Amazon, instead of leaving it the way it was with the black bars on the side, they have cropped it. The problem is, this makes for some really uncomfortable close-ups. Like, we get way too close to people's faces. Their whole face takes up the screen because of the way that it has been cropped. Now, the first thing that we see is Cliff Huxtable. He comes out with a pumpkin that he's very proud of the way he carved it. And the face is fine. No complaints about how he's carved the face. However, I will point out, he carved the top of the pumpkin wrong. I have seen this done before, but if you grew up carving the pumpkin so that you take basically the top of it and just lop it off, you're doing it wrong. Thinking people, know that you go in a small circle around the stem at an angle. You don't just lop off the top of the pumpkin. Anyway, just one thing I wanted to point out. We're not going to go, scene by... I know I always say this and then I do the exact opposite, but we're really not this time going to go scene by scene. We're just going to talk about the Halloween-y goodness in the episode, okay? And I'll give the plot a little bit so that we are talking about an actual thing, but the Halloween-y goodness is really what we're here for. So Rudy comes downstairs. She is dressed as a pumpkin, but there's something a little bit strange because she is wearing face makeup. Her face is kind of painted like a jack-o'-lantern, but I think maybe the actress, Keisha Knight Pullman, had an issue with makeup, or they were just running out of time, or they just thought it would look better. I don't know. But they literally just drew the outline, so she's got like triangles drawn around her eyes, and they're not filled in. It's just a black triangle outline around her eyes, and also on her nose, and then a black outline grin on her mouth. And that's it. So to me, it was kind of like, well, why even bother painting the face if you're not going to fill it in? And just, I don't know, it's just something weird that I noticed. Thought I'd bring it up. We then have, so they're getting ready to go trick-or-treating. Some of her friends have come over. Peter and a little girl named Katie have come over, and there's a brief moment where Peter is sitting there talking to Katie, and you can't hear what they're saying. It's just, they're just showing that, oh, these kids are there. They're establishing that the kids are there. The doorbell rings and so goes to answer or whatever. But it's, first of all, it's strange that you see Peter talking, because Peter's a recurring character on the show. He's one of Rudy's young friends, and his whole shtick is that he doesn't talk and that he's easily afraid or intimidated, and he runs out the door. That's Peter's whole thing, right? So it's kind of strange to see Peter sitting there talking to a little girl. But what's even funnier about this moment is that Peter appears to be talking right to her and everything, and this little girl looks so disinterested. She's staring straight ahead. She has no expression on her face. It's really pretty funny, because you could just see this being a party where, you know, the woman is not interested and the guy just doesn't get it and keeps talking. So Peter is there. He's dressed as a pirate. Katie is there. She is dressed as a construction worker with a mask on the helmet, which I thought was a weird but kind of nice little touch. I guess it's Halloween. The kids probably just insisted on wearing a mask or something. Vanessa comes down, and she is wearing very brightly colored, I guess what you would call traditional African garb. My question here is that okay? I'm sure it was fine in the 80s. Looking back on it now in 2018, is that okay? Of course, we are assuming that this is an African-American family, but she is not directly African herself. So I wonder what the rules in 2018 are about that. I know everybody's very culturally sensitive, and I just wonder. Me, I'm one of those, it's either all okay or none of it's okay kind of guys. So I think it's fine. There's a difference between dressing up as a different culture, even if it is part of a costume. If you're a real Halloween fan, I think most of the time you think of costumes as kind of, well, first of all, I don't call them Halloween costumes. I call them Halloween uniforms. But also, if I'm dressing up as you for Halloween, that should be taken as an honor. Not me personally, but the fact that, you know, someone wanted to dress up as you, and, you know, although I never did, I don't think I've ever done like ethnic costumes. I don't think so. But, you know, when I was a kid, if someone had dressed up as an Indian, meaning Native American Indian, you know, that would not have caused a stir. And I don't know. I'm just saying. I just wonder. I'm just saying. I know she's black. I'm just saying. She's not African. Is it okay? What do you think? What do you think the kids of today would think? And then we have her friend Janet. She is dressed up. I guess she's supposed to be kind of like an old-timey Western lady. That's my guess. Anyway, it's a nice costume. Very fancy costume. Then Claire Huxtable comes out, the mom on the show, and she is dressed as Tina Turner. She is wearing a leather skirt. And this makes me wonder a bit, because the Claire Huxtable that we know on the show would not wear a leather skirt in, you know, regular life. So this is clearly for a Halloween costume. But then I wonder, did she buy this for the Halloween costume, or was this something she had? Maybe there's a side to Claire that we just don't get to see on the show. Now, Cliff Huxtable was not planning to wear a costume, but Rudy says she's going to dress him up. She runs upstairs and grabs random things from the closet, and when they come back down, he is dressed kind of as a clown/witch. He's just wearing very brightly colored clothes and mismatch, and he's got a clown nose on and a witch's hat, so I guess he's kind of a clown witch. He takes the kids out trick-or-treating, and he had very small bags for them, which I thought was funny, but we'd find out later in the episode they actually got 2 bags each. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's good, because those little tiny bags weren't going to cut it. They go out trick-or-treating, but Vanessa is hosting a party for her friends. So she's, I would guess, middle school age here. I think she's 12, I think they say. Either 11 or 12, so yeah, about middle school age. And she's, hosting this party with her friends. And of course, we find out that she is into this guy named Robert. And Robert's going to be at the party. So that's what the whole episode is going to be about, Vanessa trying to meet Robert. Now, one thing that I love about The Cosby Show is that they always play this generic music. And it's like this weird synthesized jazz most of the time. And it was the number one show in the country. Especially, we're already in the second season here. It was the number one show in the country, and you'd think that they could afford to license actual real music from the time, like the Wonder Years or something like that did. But no, they always use this weird music. If you've watched the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now let's talk about some of the costumes we see at the Halloween party here. We have Scott, who's going to turn out to be Robert's, number one guy here, kind of a go-between. And Scott is dressed, presumably, again, as a Western gambler, so he kind of matches Janet. Maybe there's something going on there, although we don't really get too many hints about it in the episode, although they do dance together at one point. Then we have one girl who's kind of dressed in a generic 80s girl kind of way, maybe supposed to be Madonna, I'm not sure. We have a little girl dressed as Boy George, which I loved. We have another girl dressed as Cyndi Lauper, also lovely. And then there's one kid dressed as what looks like he's supposed to be like a gang member, I guess. I don't know. Maybe like a street punk, I don't know. But he's wearing a red bandana. He's got a red bandana in the back of his pocket, so maybe he's a blood. I don't know. Then we have a kid who's definitely dressed straight up as a punk, which was a popular costume. I think punks and nerds were two things that were kind of like go-tos for kids. Like you could just pull things off. I used to dress like I saw Revenge of the Nerds, and I used to wear some of my brother's clothing, and I'd be like, oh, I'm a nerd, and we'd be nerds on parade and march around the neighborhood. So yeah, I guess my brother had nerdy enough clothes that I thought that passed. We have another kid dressed as the Karate Kid, or a Karate Kid at least. And we have someone dressed as a baseball player. Now, my problem with these two costumes, Karate Kid and the baseball player, that's fine, except that these are probably just, the kid probably took karate, and this little girl was probably on a baseball team somewhere, and that's why they had these uniforms. And even as a kid, I've always thought that was such a cop-out, and I still do to this day, and I don't respect those as Halloween costume choices. So you two are out. Then we have a kid dressed as a guy in a fez and like a dashiki kind of thing. Not okay in 2018, but okay in the 80s. And then we have a child dressed as a Native American Indian. Again, probably not okay in 2018, but perfectly acceptable in the 80s. Now, Robert, Vanessa's dream man, he is there. He is dressed as a vampire, and he's wearing a vampire mask. It's clearly a vampire mask. It's got vampire teeth and everything. But Cliff later on refers to him as the Phantom. So I'm not sure exactly what the episode is going for, but my bet is on vampire, and I guess Cliff just didn't see him with the mask on, so he became the Phantom. Okay. Now, after some time, Cliff and Rudy and the kids come back from trick-or-treating. We know that they have the separate bags. And this isn't such a bad idea. This is probably something they were trying to spur on in the 80s. One color bag was for the houses of people that they knew, and the other bags were for the people that they did not know, so they could bring them home and get inspected by their parents before they ate anything. Cliff then says he's going to give them 3 pieces of candy each out of the bags from people that they knew. And as a kid, that would not have cut it with me. If I was over my friend's house and they were like, oh, you can have 3 pieces of candy, that is not how we did it in the Dwinell's household. We came home, immediately dumped our candy on the floor and looked through to see what we got. And at that point, I ate every Reese's Pieces or peanut butter cup that I could find. Peanut butter cups were my favorite Halloween candy, and they still kind of are, although now I am diabetic, which probably stems from these Halloween binges that I used to go on as a kid. Couldn't have helped. Anyway, as I said before, the major plot of this episode is that Vanessa has a crush on Robert. We find out pretty early on that Robert also has a crush on Vanessa, but them, of course, being juveniles, can't talk about their own feelings and send their friends to talk about it in between. So this is Scott and Janet. So Vanessa will say, like, well, tell him I'll talk to him, but only because I'm being polite and it's a party and I'm trying to be polite. So then Janet will have to go and tell Scott, and then Scott would go and tell Robert, and it goes on like that. And, I think most of us have grown up in similar situations. There was a girl that you liked, but you were afraid to tell her, and you wanted to see how she felt first. So you kind of ask a friend to kind of poke around and try to get some answers for you, but they couldn't go directly to that person because it would be too suspicious. So you had to send a friend of a friend. It became a whole thing. But to be honest with you, even in adult life, I think a lot of people struggle with the very same issues. Nobody wants to be rejected, right? So you try to kind of find out what your odds are before you get in there. I understand that. And it's still kind of the same, right? If we're honest with ourselves. Now, at some point in the party, Theo and Denise, which are the older brother and sister here in the Cosby family, return from going to their own high school party. Denise, by the way, played by Lisa Bonet, one of my television crushes. I had very many television crushes, and I always thought that Denise was very attractive, and I still do. She is now married to Jason Momoa, but before that she was married to Lenny Kravitz, so she's doing all right for herself. Anyway, we also have Theo. He is dressed as a wrestler, not a specific wrestler. He's just wearing, tights and leopard print, and he's got a cape and a championship belt. So we know that he is a wrestler. They don't really do too much in the show. And then, as I said, we see Scott and Janet dancing together, but again, generic music, and this time it is light jazz flute. And, I'm sorry, it's not. This is Vanessa and Robert dancing together. And Vanessa says, "I like that song." And then Robert says, "Yeah, it's really easy to dance to." Those 80s, see, I guess in the 80s, 12-year-olds loved some jazz flute. Now, this is the plot here. It comes in. Vanessa drops the tray of glasses because she's too, her breath is just taken away by staring at Robert across the room. Now, because she dropped these glasses, she's embarrassed. She runs to her room and she won't come out. We get a look at what even as a kid, I thought this was weird. In the kids' rooms, Rudy and Vanessa share a room. We see the weird stuffed animals that the Cosby family always had, and they look. What I mean by that is they look like the prizes you would win at a carnival, and those are the only kind of stuffed animals that these kids had. Now, I know maybe you can't use a pound puppy or something, but use some generic equivalent or have someone in the props department make you something up. You are the #1 show. And it just looks like these kids grew up with these raggedy-ass toys that nobody really wanted or played with when they were kids. Like the giant styrofoam-filled dogs that you couldn't even cuddle with and stuff. I'm just saying, it was weird. So what happens is Claire comes up to talk to her, and then Janet comes in, and then one by one the kids move in, and the party is taken upstairs. Cliff comes in and says, very cringeworthy now looking back, although innocent enough at the time, Cliff says, "You can have the party up here, but I don't want anybody on any of these beds in a horizontal position." Yikes. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just you wait. In the end of the episode, Vanessa and Robert meet in the hallway, and Robert asks her to go steady, so Vanessa gets her man. And that is the Halloween episode. Now, as far as Halloween episodes go, it's nice because you get to see all those Halloween costumes. That's great. There's trick-or-treating involved. That's good. You get the little PSA, slyly stuck in there about, taking candy from houses, and all that, and maybe limiting your candy intake, although, again, not a rule in the Dwinell's household. So, it's nice in that way, but it's not a classic in the way that Roseanne's first Halloween episode is, or even perhaps some of the Home Improvement episodes, or Kate and Allie, where there's something that spooky that actually happens. There's nothing spooky going on in this episode. The other episode that I want to talk about is from Season 4. It is Season 4, Episode 4, and it's called Cliff's Mistake. This is a Halloween episode in the sense that it happens on Halloween, but the actual Halloween-y goodness doesn't take up too much time. That's not the main point of the story. This is really about Cliff losing his neighbor's drill that he had borrowed, and the neighbor gets upset about it, and then the whole episode is Cliff looking for this drill. What's he going to do about it? The interesting thing here is that the neighbor is a man named Jeffrey Ingalls, and he is played by Wallace Shawn. Wallace Shawn is a character actor who's been in a million things, but most notably The Princess Bride. I am totally blanking on his character's name, and I'm sure some of you are screaming at me right now. But he's the guy, the inconceivable guy who drinks the poison and all that. Spoiler alert. But Wallace Shawn is great, and happy to have him in this episode. Cliff says that he had borrowed the drill to build a shelf in the kitchen cabinet, so he opens the cabinet to show that he did in fact put the brackets in. You can see where he's placed the brackets. He's got about 2 inches of space above that, and it's on the back of a door, so I don't know exactly what they're planning to put on this shelf, but it must be very small. The kids are getting ready to host a haunted house in the basement of the Cosby home. They are coming out now. They are playing Dead Man with peeled grapes. You remember Dead Man, where you pass around bowls of things, so the peeled grapes would be his eyes, and then someone would pass a thing of spaghetti and say, these are his intestines, and, so that kind of thing. Vanessa's not excited about it. She tells Theo they're too old to be haunted house and trick-or-treating and all that stuff. Theo's working on a ghost at the kitchen table. He's putting together a ghost dummy, and he tells Vanessa, he's like, oh, that's too bad. You're too old for it, because we were going to make you the mummy, and you could come out of the coffin that I made, which is totally awesome, and, you could grab people and moan and everything. And then Vanessa gets excited. She's all excited about that. And then Rudy is there, and Vanessa says, what are you going to be? And Rudy says, I'm going to be the witch. And Rudy's friend Kenny is there, who you might remember better as Bud, because in several episodes she used to call him Bud. One of Kenny's running gags is that his brother is a major influence on him, his older brother that we never see. And Kenny always talks about what his older brother said, and it's always something sexist, and this episode is no exception. At this point, Kenny says that Rudy has to be a witch because girls can only be witches or princesses on Halloween, and that leads to a whole discussion. Cliff comes in from the novelty store, where he says he has bought some Halloween novelties to scare people with. He pulls out some very small rubber spiders and tries to scare the kids with them by dangling them over their heads. The kids are not impressed, and Vanessa points out that they're not very big, to which Cliff answers, and somewhat logically here, he says, well, you don't want them to be too big, because then people will know right away that they're not real. You want people to think they're real. It's not a bad point. Of course, it all depends how you rig it up, I guess. He then takes out a big rubber bat, hoping that that would impress the kids, and that actually is pretty cool. But the kids are unimpressed. But I thought the bat was pretty cool. He then takes out a power drill that he bought for himself because, he knew he was giving this other drill back. So he went out and bought this new drill while he was out there. And Theo gets really excited and says, oh, a power drill. We can really scare the kids with that. And Cliff, says, no, this is for me. Get out of here. You're a bunch of sickos, which I think is a good commentary on the reaction that most parents had to horror movies of the 70s and 80s, talking about how, this is a symptom of what happens when you watch those kind of movies. Then Jeffrey Ingalls shows up. He has brought his daughter Beth, who is Rudy's age. She is dressed as a skeleton. She runs off to join the kids downstairs in setting up the haunted house. And then Jeff and Cliff talk and discuss what they were scared of as kids and how the kids today just aren't scared by these things and it's all blood and guts. An interesting little moment. This has nothing to do with Halloween, although it is very scary. There is a very unnecessary shot of Cliff and Jeffrey's asses as they look for this drill under the sink where the brackets were put in place. And, of course, Cliff can't find it. And then, like I said, it leads to the whole plot we talked about earlier. Just pointing out, we don't need to see two middle-aged men's asses in widescreen, especially cropped so that they take up the entire screen as you watch it on Amazon. Now it's time for them to practice the haunted house. The kids are in costume. They're downstairs. They are recording themselves to make a soundtrack for their haunted house. Theo is Dracula with long jerry curl hair. So glow. Kenny is a pirate. And, of course, Rudy and Vanessa are the witch and the mummy, respectively. They record their scary sounds. Then they hear Cliff coming downstairs. He's looking for the drill, of course. So they all say, okay, now's our chance. They all hide. Cliff comes down. He hears the noises. The lights are low. Theo's ghost that he was sewing upstairs earlier comes down, hits him in the head. Vanessa comes out of the coffin. The kids all come out, all reaching towards Cliff and laugh. Haha, we scared you. And he says, yeah, help me look for the drill. No one can find it. Peter comes in, back upstairs. Cliff goes back upstairs. He talks to Claire for a minute. Peter comes in costume. I'm sorry, no costume. Peter comes in. He's not wearing a costume. And they say, oh, the kids are down in the basement. We see him go down to the basement. We hear the noise start, so they must be doing the same thing to him that they just did to Cliff. Peter, true to his character, comes running right back out. Now, that's really where the Halloween-y stuff ends. And the real disappointment in this episode is that we never get to see the actual haunted house. I think it would have been a better Halloween episode if they had let some of the neighborhood kids come over and walk through the haunted house. Of course, the problem is they didn't really have a haunted house. I think everything we saw with Cliff was what they had. I think it would have been nice if they had built that up more. But of course, the point of the show wasn't really about the haunted house. It was about Cliff looking for this drill, which, by the way, he does eventually find when he remembers that he had used it, or that he had hidden it among Christmas lights so the kids wouldn't take it and mess with it. And he, fixes his friendship with Jeffrey. And that's the end of the episode. So, those are the Halloween episodes of the classic Cosby Show. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, because although the Cosby Show is classic, and if you were to watch it today, not knowing anything about Bill Cosby, you could probably still watch those early episodes and think, hey, this is a great show, perhaps one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, and this is the kind of guy I would want to be my dad. He's funny, he's smart, he's goofy, he's not afraid to be a goofball with his kids, all the best qualities of a dad that you would want, right? But he's still strict with them too, and he still guides them and loves them and all that. So, there's a reason he's called America's dad, And, of course, he went on to more success after the show. This was his biggest success, probably, but he did have more television shows. He had a show, Kids Say the Darndest Things, and which was like a revival where he talked to kids, and that was always, mildly amusing. He had, I think, two network shows after that. He was scheduled to have another network show and a special on Netflix, but those didn't happen for reasons we're about to get into. And of course, the elephant in the room is that Bill Cosby is now, as of 2018, a convicted, sentenced predator, sexual predator. He is currently serving time in jail. He is serving 3 to 10 years for sexual assault. And again, I'm just going to cover this in a very basic way. There is so much more that could be said about it. And perhaps a white male is not the most important perspective to have on it. I did ask a couple of the recurring female guests if they were interested in coming on and discussing this with me, and they were not. So here we are. But I still thought it's something that we could and should talk about. This is technically a comedy show, and of course, I don't like to get too heavy, but this is a very heavy subject, but also a very interesting subject. The fall of a true American icon. And again, a personal, I don't know if hero's the right word. It's certainly not the right word now, but someone that I definitely admired very much and would have considered a great role model in life on, achievement and certainly comedically. But he's tarnished that whole legacy with his actions. And the problem is he was convicted in one case, but he was accused in many, many, many more. And the story from accuser to accuser doesn't change all that much, which lends some credibility to them. And especially when you see some of these women interviewed, there are 2 or 3 really good documentaries on YouTube that you can look up just type in Bill Cosby documentary. I'm sure they'll come up. One is from CNN, one is from the BBC. Those are the ones I remember. They're both very good. And you hear these women tell their stories, and you can still see the fear in their faces and the hurt and the disillusionment that it caused. So I'm just going to briefly run down the allegations, charges that actually landed him in jail, because basically what happened was it was known that he was cheating on his wife. That was not news, even, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. It wasn't that big a deal. People knew about it, but it's Hollywood. It's kind of expected to happen, sadly, in Hollywood, that either, relationships break up or that the big star is cheating and he kind of gets to do what he wants as far as women go. Even in the A&E biography episode about him, they talk about it, and they mention like, it tarnishes his image as America's dad, but his wife is sticking by him and they seem to be bouncing back from it. I remember that's how the episode originally ended. I'm sure they've updated it since, if they show that episode at all anymore. But I had that episode on tape because I was such a big Cosby fan. So I happen to remember that that's how that episode ended. But let's get to Cosby, the Predator. It begins with a woman named Andrea Constand. She was the director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple University. Bill Cosby was an alumni, and he gave generously to the school, both in his time making appearances for them and in monetary donations. So he was very important to the school. Through events at the school and events that Cosby held at his home, he and Andrea became friendly. In January of 2004, Constand went to Cosby's house in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, after a night out with her friends. Constand states that Cosby listened to her complaints about being stressed out. This is where their stories diverge. Cosby says Constand complained of headaches and not being able to sleep, so he gave her some Benadryl. He says the two engaged in some consensual heavy petting, and then he went to bed. Constand claims he gave her 2 small blue pills, which he did not identify, and they immediately made her very sleepy. She says she became physically frozen, and then saw Cosby sitting beside her. He began to fondle her breast and touch her vagina. She claimed he then put her hands on his penis, and at this point, she says she became completely unconscious. When she woke up, she was alone and her clothing was spread all over the room. Even after the attack, Constand admits that she had further contact with Bill Cosby, which would hurt her case later on. She still went to events, she still went to meetings with him, and she even brought her parents to meet him after a show that they did close to her hometown. A year after the assault, Constand finally reported the incident to police. The DA ultimately refused to press charges due to a lack of evidence. They said, well, why are you only reporting it now, a year after it happened, and why would you still go see him or attend events with him, or that he was at, or bring your parents to meet him after it happened? This is a good question, because logically you would think if you were sexually assaulted by somebody, then you would stay away from that person, you'd want to report it right away, all that stuff. However, we know that this is not uncommon at all, as a matter of fact, in survivors of sexual assault. The reasons why this is true are manifold, and we can only speculate as to the exact reasons here. I don't have court transcripts, so I don't know what her particular answers would have been. But of course, my speculation, a couple things that I can think of. She did work for the university where Cosby was very important. He donated a lot of money. He was the kind of a public face for the university. So to tarnish his reputation would be to tarnish the university in general, and of course, possibly cost her job. He's a very powerful person, so it would probably not end well for her if that was the case. So that is a very good reason why she might continue to attend events that Bill Cosby was listed at. She might not want to arouse his suspicion that she did not feel good about the encounter, or that she was seeing it for what it was, which was a sexual assault. They only describe it as a sexual assault. As far as I have been able to read online, I haven't found anything saying that he necessarily full-on raped her. Not saying that there needs to be a huge distinction made between the two things. Any kind of unwanted sexual advance is unwanted and therefore unacceptable. But I am just, if you're wondering why I keep saying sexual assault and not rape, that is why I am distinguishing between the two. So those are some reasons why, and I think very good reasons. Just speculation on my part. Could possibly be more other reasons that I'm not considering, but I don't think it's as illogical as it might sound at first. Undeterred, Constant filed a civil lawsuit against Cosby. At this time, 13 other women came forward, prepared to testify that Cosby had also assaulted them in a manner almost identical to the way in which Constant said she had been assaulted. So he was gonna face criminal prosecution for this, but a civil prosecution would mean that he was responsible for the crime that occurred to her. It's a weird kind of thing. The same thing happened famously to O.J. Simpson. He was found innocent in the criminal trial of murder, but he was found guilty in the civil trial. So even though he was found innocent of the murder, he was found responsible for the murder. So this was going to go to trial, and if it did, those 13 women would have had their chance to say, yes, he did something similar to me. But rather than face a trial, Cosby settled out of court with Constant for what we know now is about $3.8 million. Since the suit was settled, the other accusers did not get to testify. And of course, they couldn't press civil charges because I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe the reason that they couldn't press their own charges was that the time between the assault was too great. There is a statute of limitations for pressing charges, either criminal or civil, in cases of sexual assault, unfortunately. So after this, Cosby's life went on pretty much as normal for several years. So I honestly don't even really remember hearing about this, or if I did, I probably just thought, oh, it settled out of court, so that means he probably just threw money at it, and it probably didn't really happen the way it said it would happen. That's unfortunately what a lot of people think when things are settled out of court, myself included. That's kind of the first reaction, is like, well, if it was really something this terrible, you wouldn't have settled it out of court. But of course, that's not really a fair way to think, because there's a lot of pressures, and you could go to court and they're not found guilty, and then where are you? So at least in this way, she was making him pay $3.8 million, is probably still a significant amount of money to Bill Cosby, and I'm sure it's a significant amount for someone who is a director of operations for a women's basketball team. So, you know, the naysayers will say that she was a gold digger and this was an opportunity that she was looking for. That's certainly what Cosby's lawyers say, and say now still, most likely. But what happened after this, again, he went on as usual. I went to see him in concert, not having any thought of these, allegations in my mind. But then a clip of Hannibal Buress calling Cosby a rapist went viral, and the floodgates opened. Now, Hannibal is just a young comic, and he was doing a routine and just kind of going off about Bill Cosby, because Bill Cosby kind of was always talking about the black community and the problems in the black community, and you need to pull up your pants, and you need to, whatever. And it's, he was kind of an old and curmudgeonly man talking down to the black youth. And so Hannibal was kind of calling him out and saying, like, I can talk down to you, as Bill Cosby, he was saying, I can talk down to you because I had a successful sitcom 20 years ago. And he says, yeah, Bill, but you also rape women. So that's not an exact quote, but pretty close to what he said. And that clip went viral. The floodgates opened. Over 50 women came forward to claim that Cosby had drugged and sexually assaulted them, and some, of course, even did claim rape. All of the alleged cases had passed their statute of limitations, so they could not be tried in court, except for Andrea Constance. Prosecutors took another look at her case now that they had access to Cosby's own words via his deposition from the 2005 civil lawsuit. In that deposition, he admitted to purchasing drugs with the expressed intent of using them to have sex with women, and that he had moved, quote, into that area that is somewhere between permission and rejection with Constant. So with these new pieces of evidence, they decided to go forward with the trial. Of course, history has shown Bill Cosby was found guilty and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, which he just started serving, last month, I think? Maybe earlier this month. And I want to talk about that quote about the area somewhere between permission and rejection is so fucking creepy. And longtime listeners will know that I did a show about creeps, and I had a young woman named Fatima on that episode, thinking that all young women probably have experience with creeps, and that's why I wanted a woman on the show, because, I actually have had run-ins with creeps, but they're few and far between as a man. But I would imagine that most women have stories about run-ins with creeps. And Fatima really didn't have any, and I was shocked, but happy for her. But I was wondering if I was a creep too on that episode. And as I look back, there are things that I've done that maybe I wish I hadn't done. But this line about somewhere between permission and rejection, I really thought hard about that. Because, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm thinking, I've been out with women, and I wasn't quite sure where they were at mentally, I wanted to get something physical going, and but I wasn't sure where they were at. And I thought to myself, have I ever taken things too far or put pressure on somebody in a way that could turn around and they could say that this was an assault of some kind? And if I'm being honest with myself, the answer is absolutely fucking not. Absolutely not. Because I was thinking, I'm like, well, maybe there's kind of a gray area, or maybe, it's, but then I said, no, actually, there's no gray area. I'll tell you exactly what happened. It's, there's been a handful of times where I have been hoping for something more, and I took a chance, and the answer was no. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. I've got a prime example. This is a good example. I was on a date with a woman. She had asked me out. We went out to dinner. We came back here. We watched a movie. It was Rosemary's Baby, by the way. Horror movies are always good. And at one point, I leaned over and kissed her. And at that point, she said, oh, I don't really want to go that fast. So what I did was I stopped kissing her and asked if it was okay if I left my arm on her shoulder, to which she said yes, and we just cuddled up and finished the movie. At the end of the night, I walked her to her car, gave her a hug goodbye, and said goodnight. The next day, we texted. Nothing really came of those dates, but it was fine as far as I know on both ends. That was the extent of it. I went in for the kiss, kissed her forehead or whatever, temple, whatever. And when she expressed that she was not looking for that, I stopped. It's just that simple. So that gray area I was worrying about, and the gray area that Mr. Cosby seems to be talking about, it doesn't exist. And even if it does, it exists only the moment before you attempt to make a move. And your first move should not be drug them and then grope them on the couch. That is not a move. That is a sexual assault, and that is why you were in jail, you motherfucker. Bill Cosby is such a disappointment. It's heartbreaking. And for me personally, and for the country in general, and for all of his fans, It's terrible. And I think that's why it took people a lot. It took a lot to believe that this was true of Bill Cosby. And that's why a lot of people didn't come forward. He was so powerful and so beloved. Who was going to believe a dancer from the Playboy Club that Bill Cosby had sexually assaulted her? You know, what good was going to come from her saying this? The answer is probably nothing. Probably nothing was going to happen to Cosby, and she was going to be called a whore or worse. And, you know, her career and life was going to be affected by it. So it's not crazy. These women are not crazy for coming forward right away. It's unfortunate that they didn't, and it's unfortunate that if they had come forward, they still probably wouldn't have gotten the reaction that we hope they get now, but even now they weren't believed at first. And even I myself didn't want to believe, because we didn't want to believe that Cosby was like that. It's terrible, but we have to face facts. Now the problem is, what do we do with his legacy? Because the Cosby Show was a very important show. He is a very important performer for a whole variety of reasons that I've touched upon earlier. And honestly, I don't know the answers. I just know I loved the Cosby Show when I was a kid. I loved it as an adult. I think I've mentioned this before. I meant to mention it earlier, but I spoke a few episodes back about a very bad breakup that I went through and went into a very, very deep depression. But one of the things that I found comforting was in watching movies and things like that, because it kind of took me out of things. And one of them that I used to watch, I went to Blockbuster, was still open at the time, and they were, you know, they would sell previously rented videos. And they had the first 2 seasons of The Cosby Show available to buy. And it was like, you know, $5 for a whole season. So I bought those first 2 seasons and I watched those shows, and it took me back to a gentler time in my life with a nice, gentle show that was always funny. This obviously was before anything came out about Bill Cosby. And so not only did I love it as a kid, but it helped during my depression as an adult. So you just don't want to believe that these things are true, but monsters hide in plain sight all the time, and that certainly seems to be the case with Bill Cosby. So I understand why some of you might have been hesitant to listen to this episode and to even discuss the Halloween episodes of The Cosby Show, but it is a classic sitcom, and it's a classic thing for without a better way to put. I know I'm so elegant sometimes. From my childhood and from my life, and yet it's so tarnished, it's so blackened. What the fuck do we do with it now? Trust me, that is the least problem to come out of all of this. Of course, my sympathies are not with Bill Cosby or other Cosby fans exactly first and foremost. They are with the victims of his sexual assault, which I absolutely believe he is guilty of. There might be a few who are, you know, trying to jump on the bandwagon and trying to be part of the story. But when you hear these women so passionately describing very, very similar events, there's no way they're all making it up. And the fact that he had a routine years and years ago about Spanish Fly, which was a thing not exactly the same, you know, is supposed to be a thing that you could put in a woman's drink that would make her horny, and he's got a whole routine about it. Clearly this kind of thing was on his mind, and again, the reports of what he did and what he said and what happened, they're all very, very similar. So it really is an American nightmare as far as pop culture goes. So that is my discussion on The Cosby Show. I know I sped through those episodes, and it's hard to, you know, have a lighthearted look at these episodes now. That's why I wanted to get the information out there. I want to talk about it a little bit, but really we had to talk about Bill Cosby, serial rapist, unfortunately. So on that happy, cheery note, we will close this episode. Once again, please check out spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the show's blog page. Of course, you can find our social media links there. We are at spookyasshit on Instagram and Twitter. And don't forget to find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. Women out there, be careful. And gentlemen, don't be fucking creeps. No means no. And even if you think it's just their way of flirting and they're trying to play hard to get, take them seriously. Until next time, don't be afraid.